So the project transport input tab is divided into two main sections. We have company owned and operated vehicles and grey fleet. So grey fleet is when employees use their personal cars for business purposes. And then the second section is project related business travel. So this covers all other forms of transport undertaken in third party operated vehicles, such as travelling by train, bus, coach, flying. So it is essential to differentiate between project related transport and overheads transport, which will be input in the overheads tab. So project related transport is transport that's directly linked to a project. So this could be, for example, travelling to and from a project site. And then overheads transport is transport that is not directly tied to a specific project. So this could be, for example, travelling to a FAME conference or any other general business related trips. So any transport that's categorised as overheads should be input into the overheads input tab, and any project transport should be input in this tab here. So obviously, as I keep saying, it's important not to double count, so ensure that you are not duplicating this data between the two tabs. So as seen across other tabs, we're using a data preference hierarchy to prioritise the best quality data. So we have option A in green, option B in orange, and option C in red. Similarly, for project-related business travel, we have an option A and an option B. So a flow chart is given to the right of the tables to sort of guide you in choosing which option is most suited to the data that you are able to collect. And you need to make sure that you're not inputting the same data in different formats. So if you know the litres of fuel, litres of diesel consumed by your company fleet, then you do not need to also input the mileage travelled by your company fleet. You only need to input the data in one format. The tool is designed to flag any duplication attempts, and it will just ask you if you're sure that you want to continue ensuring that data represents distinct activities. So either litres of fuel consumed or total miles travelled for a journey, if they're representing different, because there might be a case where you have some data for some activities and option A data for some activities but option B data for others. So same with the business travel. If you input the distance, then you don't need to input the cost as well. And if you do want to input, if you have, for example, some trains you know the distances for and some you only know the cost, they need to be input in separate lines. Otherwise, if you input both distance and cost, the tool will just completely ignore the cost and only calculate based on the distance that's been input. So you would need to do them on separate lines. So I'll just do a quick run through of inputting the data. So as always, we want to input our name and then the project code, and then let's do a forecast data entry. So as with everywhere else in the tool, if you get a dark grey box, then it indicates that you should not enter anything into the box. So with forecast data entries, if it just takes the expected start and end date of the project as the start date and end date of the record that you were entering. So let's start with the company owned and operated vehicles and grey fleet. So if we use the flow chart, so we ask ourselves, is the litres of fuel consumed by company vehicles available? So if the answer is yes, let's say for the company vehicles, we know that we're predicting that we will consume 20,000 litres of diesel for this project. And we have some electric vehicles, and we're predicting that we will need to do some some roadside charging. So it's very important with the electric vehicles that when you are inputting transport data for electric vehicles in kilowatt hours, you are not including any kilowatt hours that are used at your offices. So when your vehicles are charging at the offices, as that electricity consumption will be included in the office consumption. And so if you then input it again in vehicles, then you will be duplicating the data, as that electricity consumption will be included in the overheads input. So any electric vehicle data that you input has to be for charging that happens not at the office, so on the side of the road, for example. So, and for EVs, ideally we would have kilowatt hours. If that's not possible, then we would input mileage, and if that's not possible, then we will input the cost of the charge. So now, if we were going to talk about grey fleet, so we ask ourselves, are the litres of fuel consumed by the vehicles available? Let's say no. So then we want to, is the total distance by vehicle size and fuel type available? Say we have that information for some vehicles. So we've got car, and then the drop down will show you size and a fuel type. So to help you determine the size, as what we've got the definitions just to the right of the table here. So a small car is defined according to DESNZ, which is the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. Up to a 1.4 litre petrol engine is considered a small car. From 1.4 to 2 litres is considered medium, and then bigger than 2 litres is large. And then you've got your different definitions for diesel and other vehicles. So say we know that they're going to be medium diesel cars, and we think they're going to travel 2,000, that employees are going to expense 2,000 miles worth of, they're going to expense 2,000 miles for this specific project. Just note that these drop downs give you an option of miles or kilometres. Sorry, I've just wrote it in. But then say we also know that there's going to be that some of our employees have vans, and but we don't know the size of the vans. So that's when we go down to option C. So we'll enter grey fleet, we'll enter van, and say we think they're going to travel 2,000 kilometres. And say we also, I'll just demonstrate electric vehicle charging. So electric vehicle charging, it specifies here not at the office. So let's say we think we're going to spend £100 on roadside charging for our electric vehicles. Now, if we move on to project-related business travel. So if we look at the flow chart, is the distance by each mode of transport available in physical units? So let's have a look at the options here. So say we know that we think we're going to travel on National Rail 1,000 kilometres. So I will just note that this drop down depends on what's in this box. So for bus, there's no options. So don't be put off if this drop down doesn't have, if no drop down appears, then it's because there's no further detail that you need to give. So I think for taxi, it gives an option of taxi or black cab. Rail is national or international. Flight, there's quite a lot of options there. So if it gives you options, then you should input the detail if possible, otherwise it might cause an error. So let's also do an example. Let's say we've got some domestic flights and we know it's going to be 1,000 miles and it's going to cost us £500. So this is an example of what you should not do. The tool will throw up an error message. So when we input this record, the tool will just take the 1,000 miles and ignore the £500 and just clear the table down. So if these represent different things, then you need to input a different entry underneath, which will be the £500, and that's how you should enter the data. But yeah, you don't want to do, if you input it all on the same line, then the cost will just be ignored and it will just take the distance data. So let's just input this now. So here we are. Duplicate data warning. So data has been input for company vehicles and grey fleet at multiple resolution levels. Do not duplicate the data across the tables. And so it just checks that the data in the input tables represent different vehicle usage. And so if they do, then you can click OK. If you realise, oops, I've added the same data in different formats, then just click cancel. Similarly, for the business travel, it says both cost and distance data has been input. So only the distance data will be used in the calculations and the cost data will just be ignored. So it just asks you to resubmit the cost data separately if it does in fact represent a different activity. So now if we go to the emissions database, we can see all the data has been input here. So it tells us whether it was option A, B or C for project transport. We can see everything has been input here as expected. And then I'll just demonstrate recalling. You can only recall one entry at a time. So let's just recall record number 8. Let's say it was actually an actual record type. So let's change that to actual. I need to input my name again. And let's say 1st of Jan 24 to the 1st of Feb 24. So we can see that was the Grey Fleet entry that was recalled there, and then you can just resubmit it like so. Perfect, so that's everything for the project transport.